Welcome to Language Lesson 93. Today we're going to be talking about some non-action verbs. So, I'm going to read you a list of verbs and I want you to stand up if the verb that I read shows action. Remember our little rap, our verb rap? A verb is a word, it's an action word. If you do it, you can do it. If you do it, it's a verb. Okay? So I'm going to read a word, I'm going to read a verb, and if you can do it, I want you to stand up. So I want you to be thinking about if you can do the verb that I say. Because a verb is a word, it's an action word. If you do it, you can do it. If you do it, it's a verb. All right, are you ready? Blown. Hopefully you stood up. That is a verb. What about happy? Hopefully you remain seated. That is not a verb. How do you show happy? I mean, you can do a smile, but that would be a verb because you're smiling, right? Okay, what about flap? Hopefully you stood up. That is a verb. What about click? Hopefully you stood up. That is a verb too. What about snore? That is a verb, so you should be standing. What about this one? Tired. That is not an action verb. Okay, it's not a verb that shows action, I should say. What about break? Hopefully you stood up. Let's do one more. Music. That is not a verb that shows action. So if you stood up, you should have remained seated. All right. So you may be wondering, well, how can a verb that we've learned that is supposed to show action, now we're talking about them not showing action? So let's talk about it. So when we are looking at sentences, we find verbs in what part of the sentence? Is it in the subject or is it in the predicate? Hopefully you said the predicate. So we've been learning that we find the verb in the predicate part of a sentence. So I want you to take a look at this sentence that I've written down. Read it out loud. Now, can you find the verb? Can you find a word in the sentence that is showing action? Can you find a word in this sentence that's showing action? Did you say no? If you said no, you're correct. There is no word in here that is showing action. There is no action in this sentence, but there must be a verb in every sentence because that's what we've learned. We've learned that there's always a subject and a predicate, and the predicate always has the verb. So now we're talking about verbs that sometimes don't show action, as we saw in this sentence. So sometimes verbs do not show action. Some of these non action verbs are these: am, is, are, was, and were. If you see am, is, are, was, and were, these are non action verbs. Now, do some of these non action verbs sound familiar? They are also some of our helping verbs. We've learned about helping verbs. Remember, the helping verb helps a verb show its action. So a lot of these non-action verbs are helping verbs. So a helping verb always helps that action of the verb to stand out or jump out in the sentence. So a non-action verb does not have an action verb to help it. So if we go back to the sentence, remember I asked if there's a word in this sentence that shows action. And we all said no. Mrs. Martin is our music teacher. There is no word in this sentence that shows action. What is the subject? Hopefully you said Mrs. Martin. That makes the verb or the non action verb is. It's not showing action, it's just making a statement about Mrs. Martin.